Good morning, everyone, to this stakeholders forum of the Data4PT project. My name is Anders Selling, and I am the Secretary General of IT4PT. And Anastasia and I'm a colleague of Anastasia and Emmanuel, who is frequently working on the project. I wanted to say that I'm happy that we have come this far now, and I remember when we had the first meeting on the topic of this project, and we started to do the planning and the grant agreement, etc. And thinking back of that, I think it's not that long time ago actually, and that we have actually achieved quite a bit so far. And I'm thinking of the work we set up with the expert team to support all the member states and the implementations of the NAPs. I'm thinking also of the work that has been done on the national profiles, the EPIP, and so on. And we recently also have kicked off, which we had a lot of discussions before we got it started, but the work on the validation support and the validation tool, which is also going on. And Anastasia and will continue and give you a bit more in depth on where we stand, etc. So, and then also I wanted to remind you, because IT4PT, we were early proposed as the implementation body of the Data4PT project, and we had been working on the Syrian NetEx standards before for a couple of years now, actually, as we have quite some experience of that. And IT4PT is set up to deliver this technical specification for initially the onboard data and the onboard interoperability. But as things are now, where more and more data moves up to the cloud, it's not very clear what's on board and what's in the cloud, etc. And IT4PT had quite some development also with this technical specification in what's included in it. So actually, for those of you who are involved or following us, you see that we have a roadmap launching or releasing a new release of the of the IT4PT technical specification every year. So we have quite some activities together with our members. And IT4PT is today, we had when the association was initially actually started off as a memorandum of understanding between the founding members and the EBSF projects, etc. But in 2016, when the association formally was registered in Brussels as a non-profit association, we had 27 founding members. And today we can count 260 members. And this is also, this is how we operate. We operate in a collaborative community together with the members. And of this 160 members, we are almost half of them are PTAs and PTOs. The organization is also completely 100% funded by membership fees. So that's how we work. And today we are only 10 people in the staff of IT4PT, but we operate together with members and member resources and members experts. And over the year, we are up to 60 people involved in different roles, in different expert roles, in working groups and committees and so on. And Data4PT is, of course, an important project for us. We have a few more projects we started getting engaged in, but it's the big project that IT4PT is involved in, so it's important for us. And I wanted to come to a conclusion also, or to something for all of us to keep in the back of our heads, and that's what we're going to do after those 4 years of the project. We had with us in the project from the beginning that we have a task to create a sustainable solution for the support of Syrian NetEx, the support of the national access points and so on. And IT4PT is a potential organization to do this, but we have not yet decided on anything. And I say also from IT4PT that it's an honor to be able to offer IT4PT to do this in a continuous basis, because I think there are clear synergies to work on Syrian NetX and national access points to the other data and the other specifications that IT4PT has the responsibility for. But we also, of course, would like to have a very clear, and that's something for discussing coming stakeholders forums and coming project activities, to have a very clear direction from the community and from the European community and from the member states what this assignment will be. But that's up to the near future for us to work on. So saying that, I would like to hand over to Anastasia and for you to continue provide a little bit of more status of where we stand on the Data4PT project. So from me and from IT4PT, thank you.
Thank you, Anders, for your welcoming short talk. I will first quickly present our detailed agenda. I guess you have all seen the key topics that we will discuss. But I will start with a few words about Data4PT project. Most of all, some practical information for you. And then we will continue with a panel session where, as an introduction, we will talk about what are the objectives of this session, and then we will hand over to our invited speakers. Victoire Chapenois from DG Move, Stéphane Hugelt from ERA, Thierry Legrand from Sensenelec, and Yves Amsler from UITP. And the idea is to share comments and ask questions in between the presentations. And for that reason, I will ask you to share your questions in the chat so we can keep track on them. And I would also like to say that in this panel, we also consider very important participants, the member states that participate to the project, and they are represented today by their mandated persons, and they are also here protagonists because they will initiate some questions that they have. They will initiate the discussions, they will share some questions, and then they will open also the floor for the wider audience. So this is the structure that we propose. And of course, we have enough time at the end. We have already predicted quite some time at the end for more questions and answers. And of course, we will have 5 minutes to conclude and to sum up the takeaways of this meeting. And so I will just share with you some key facts of the project. As a reminder, most of you might have already heard about these facts as participating to previous events that we have organized, but the project is funded by CEF program, and the project officer is DG Move. The project will finish at the end of 2023. It's a 4 years project, and the coordinator is UITP. IT4PT is responsible for the technical management. It means for the technical activities, and our partners, member states are Austria, Croatia, Czech Republic, France, Denmark, Italy, Portugal, Slovenia, and Sweden, while we have also some other countries that they follow closely the results and also support the definition of our outputs and the requirements that they said the requirements for these outputs, and there are we have quite big contribution by also those observers. The key support that Data4PT provides to help member states to implement Mmtis legislation and to implement in particular European standards as a transmodel, NetX, Siri, and all the standards that they are included in transmodel ecosystem, is to provide trainings and also to share knowledge with training material, guidelines, FAQs, and we have set for that reason both a wiki page but also a knowledge base on the website of the project, and I will show you in a while. We also provide customized technical support through our experts team, and we are also going very soon present some validation tools that they will help to ensure quality data sets of NetX and Siri format. One of the ways to support are, of course, the stakeholders fora, as this one we have today, because the exchange of experiences and best practices between the key stakeholders of this ecosystem is one of the most important ways to enhance the knowledge and to enhance implementation of the standards. And we also foresee a sustainable future business model that ensures the continuation of this support in the coming years. So the key channels that we provide support are the Data4PT website. There you will have the opportunity to submit your request, customized request or requirements through the forms that we have online. And you will have access to what we call knowledge base, and includes the guidelines, FAQs, training material, and tools. But the other channel, which is also more technically oriented, is the Data4PT.org, the wiki page, where here you will have some direct access to the technical outputs of the project. And you can also follow us in LinkedIn and in Twitter for news and events that we organize, but also for any other activity that comes up regularly. So this is from my side. If you have any questions about the practical info of the project, also please share in the chat. And now I will give the floor to my colleague Emmanuel, who will do the introduction of the panel session and the introduction of our invited speakers. So please, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Anastasia. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm very pleased today to introduce our panel session, which is around the Mmtis revisions, overcoming challenges and new opportunities this will bring. So this is today our second Data4PT Stakeholder Forum, and as you know, this is quite a key milestone in Data4PT project, as we have today opportunity to share and discuss with all of you, of course, the current status and progress about Data4PT, but also we expect today to already share and discuss what's next, and one of the main objectives, one of the main goals today is really to evaluate the new opportunities and how we can continuously support all of you as public transport stakeholders in the implementation of your national access point. So that's really our objective, and I'm quite happy to see the quite strong interest this stakeholder forum brings, as you are right now close to 100 participants to this workshop. So thank you again for joining. So today we have around the table of the panel session 4 keynote speakers, and thanks for all of them for joining today. So we have first Victoire Champenois from DigiMove, from the European Commission, and Victoire will share the status of the Mmtis legislation and the ongoing revision. You should have heard about this, and the vision and roadmap around this legislation. So of course that's a very key, let's say, milestone in the process, as it's the policymaker where it's defined the legislation. So that's really important to have this discussion today with European Commission and with all of you to be aware about the ongoing revision. And that's also opportunity for our project Data4PT to make sure that outcomes and potential recommendations can be part of this revision process. Then we'll have Stefan Nugelt from the European Union Agency for Railways, ERA. And Stefan will share vision and experience from the rail sector around the Mmtis revision and also the TAP-TSI revision, of course. And one of the main challenge here is to make sure that we have as much as possible harmonized and aligned regulation between the Mmtis and the TAP-TSI to make sure that what's going on around the national access point and the mobility data which are made available are harmonized. Then Thierry Legrand will be our third speaker today, and Thierry Legrand is representing Sen-Senelec. So Sen-Senelec is the formal European standardization body, and that's of course here a key stakeholders as well, as it's the formal body where the European standards are specified, in particular all the transmodel series, SIRI, NETEX standards are defined, are specified in SEN. So that's really important also to have the vision and perspective from the Sen-Senelec regarding the adoption, extension and development of the formal EU standards. And to conclude this panel session, we'll have Yves Amsler from UITP to share the challenges around harmonization from both Mmtis, TAP-TSI, and the coming MDMS legislation as well. So Yves Amsler is a UITP senior advisor. He has quite long experience in public transport and EU regulation. So he will share from an international association representing public transport perspective this vision. So that's the program for today. As introduced by Anastasia, you are of course welcome to comment, to ask questions. The objective around this panel discussion is really to have open and interactive exchanges. So really feel free to share any question in the chat, to raise your hand, to make it really interactive. So let's now start with the first speaker. So Victoire, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Emmanuel, and good morning, everybody. Thank you also for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today with you, and also very pleased from the Commission perspective about the progress that have been done with the Data4PT project, which is a very important project for us to help support the implementation of the legislation. I will now just share my screen. I hope you can all see it. And I will try to put it also in a big screen. The objective of the presentation today from my side is really to give you an understanding of where we are with the implementation of Mmtis and what are the next steps that we want to take, not only looking at information, but also as announced in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, from the Commission perspective, we want to look at booking and ticketing services as well. So, starting now very quickly, maybe with the implementation of Mmtis delegated regulation. You all know that this delegated regulation dates back from 2017, and the objective is really to help with accessibility, exchange and reuse of travel and traffic data to support the development of multimodal travel information services across the EU. You are also very well aware, I'm sure, that this regulation applies to the entire transport network, and a specificity also of the delegated regulation of the ITS directive. It applies to all transport modes. We have also, as you are well aware, established obligation in terms of the standards for the data exchange on the national access point. And specifically in the delegated regulation, we refer to DATEX2 and to Transmodel, NETEX and SIRI, as well as to TAP TSI for rail standards. However, and this is also important to reinforce specifically with the ongoing revision of the ITS directive, at present, the delegated regulation does not oblige transport authority, transport operators, or infrastructure manager to digitalize data. The data that needs to be shared is only the data that is already available in machine-readable formats. So, looking now at where we stand with the implementation. First, very good news is that almost all member states have established their national access points. We see that there's difference in the data that are accessible on this national access point, that there's different formats also that have been chosen, but the implementation is evolving quite well, and we are starting to have across the EU a strong networks of NAP. As I was mentioning, unfortunately, not all the data are yet accessible according to the regulation, and we had received substantial information through the first reports of the member states in 2019. We will also receive a second set of reports by the deadline was actually the 1st of December this year, 2021. So we are still receiving reports from member states, but we also need, and this is a realization that we have had in the process of implementing, that we are also expecting from the Commission side a tool to have a really detailed and comprehensive understanding of the data that are available and accessible on the NAP, and also about the quality of the data. And this is why we are also, through the CEF, setting up another project in parallel and complementary to Data4PT, which is the NAP Core project. Going very quickly also through the current support mechanism, Many member states have benefited from self-funding to help them with the development of their NAP, to help them with stakeholder engagement. Most member states have finalized their activities, and as you can see, 7 projects are still ongoing. Of course, also at the heart of the implementation of the Mmtis delegated regulation is the Data4PT project. I will, of course, not go into detail. You have here, and Anastasia presented earlier, the key objective of this project. And as I was mentioning, complementary to Data4PT is also the NAPCOR project. You can actually see here on these slides the key working group and the key objective of this project that was just signed. The first one, as you can see, is to ensure strategy and steering of governance of the different national access points. And we will also look at the interoperability and level of services of the different national access points across the member states as well as across the delegated regulation. A third point that is really important from the Commission side is also looking at the content that is accessible on the NAP, as I was just mentioning. So this will be a key working group. Fourthly, we will also have a working group looking at exchange standards, and this is where also the link with Data4PT is particularly relevant. They will be in the context of the NAPCOR project, a working group looking specifically at multimodal data, and in particular, looking how we can align and harmonize the development of the different standards. Something that we have seen in the context of the implementation of Mmtis is that you have indeed different needs and different communities developing certain standards. And from the Commission side, there is a need to help with the harmonization and the alignment of the standards to help in fine also transport operators and authorities adopt quickly and abide by the legislation as smoothly as possible. And finally, still in the context of NAPCOR, we will look at issues related to compliance assessment and harmonizing the process of inspections for the member states. So this was, I tried to be quick to give you an overview of where we stand with the implementation of Mmtis, because the objective of today from my side is also really to highlight what will be the next steps. As you have understood, so far, progress has been made in the implementation, and we are quite happy at where we stand with the existing framework. But as announced in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, we also want to continue with the efforts and to take another the Mmtis delegated regulation to another level. The objective is to establish an EU framework to increase the deployment of digital mobility services within and across the different modes to really help with multimodality. Multimodality is really at the core of the strategy, and it is also announced in the strategy that by 2030 we want to have seamless multimodal passenger transport with integrated electronic ticketing. This is actually an ambitious challenge, and you can see here on the slide the different pieces of the puzzle, how we have constructed the path to this integrated electronic ticketing. The first key pillar that will come out this week is the revision of the ITS directive, and linked to this revision also the revision of the delegated regulation on real-time traffic information. A second key pillar will be the establishment of a stakeholder expert group, the NPMF, and in 2022, the revision of Mmtis and a new proposal to support ticketing services, the MDMS initiative, which was announced as a key initiative by the Commission for 2022. This will be articulated, of course, with a horizontal development, in particular that TSI, and Stefan will give us also in-depth detail about the revision of that TSI. The CRS code of conduct for aviation, it will have to be articulated, and over horizontal development led by our colleagues in DG Connect with the Data Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the Data Governance Act. So now, going a bit more in the details of what we want to do. First of all, as I was explaining, the ITS directive revision will be out this week, and the Mmtis delegated regulation will be revised in the context of the current ITS directive. In the new framework, I can announce that pending also the last-minute political validation, Mmtis should definitely stay in the extended scope of the revised ITS directive. Then, looking exactly at what we intend to do for the Mmtis revision, the objective is to focus on enhancing the further deployment of information services and looking at the technical aspects, the data aspect and the standard aspects. One point that we want to look into is the mandatory accessibility of the dynamic data, which are currently listed in the annex of Mmtis, but are only optional, and member states can choose whether or not this data should be made accessible. So we want to ensure that those data will actually be available on all national access points for real-time information. We also want to look at updating the list of the annex and possibly include additional data sets, additional data categories, such as potentially, for example, occupancy. Another point that is particularly relevant also with the discussion that we are having today, we will look at standards for mass interfaces and potentially requiring the use of certain standards for payment and booking interfaces. And finally, we will have to work in the context of a revision of Mmtis with aligning with the data categories of the RTTI delegated regulation. So this is what we intend to do for Mmtis. And for the MDMS proposal, it will look at the ticketing and booking services, but mostly with a market angle. Mmtis will look at the technical data sharing aspect, and MDMS will look at the market hurdle and the market objectives. The MDMS proposal will have a new legal basis. It will not be based on the ITS directive. And you can see here on the slide the different specific objectives that we want to achieve. The first one is really to try and enhance trust between operators and intermediaries. And we will look at providing certainty and transparency for the B2B commercial agreement between operators and intermediaries. The second key objective that we have is to look at the potential anti-competitive behavior that can arise from the side of operator, but as well from the side of the digital services. And we are doing this also working jointly with DG Competition. And finally, the third objective, that is as important as the other two clearly for us, is to ensure that those digital services, while having the right market framework to develop, really properly enhance the efficiency and the sustainability of the transport system. So that data is being shared back with public transport authority, that you have proper information about the carbon footprint of your journey. So these are the questions really that we will look into with the MDMS initiative. Actually, you have a link here on the slide. I know that the slide will be distributed, and the links brings you to the Inception Impact Assessment of the MDMS proposal, where you will find explained also the general objective, the specific objective that I have just mentioned, which should respond to problems and problems driver that we have identified. This proposal of MDMS, we know, is quite ambitious. It's, as I mentioned, a key proposal for the Commission for 2022, and we want to make sure that there is involvement of all stakeholders and that we get as much feedback from you as possible. We had the first consultation with the publication of the Inception Impact Assessment, but we have decided to actually also create a specific expert group to discuss this point. And this expert group is the MPMF expert group, the Multimodal Passenger Mobility Forum. This expert group will follow the different steps of the impact assessment study and will serve as a basis for discussion and orientation of the policy measures that we want to take. The call for experts was actually just launched last week, and you have on this slide a link to apply for the expert group. We are looking to have around 100 members, organization, member state authorities, local authorities as well, and third country and other international organization representative. So if you have any question also on this call, very happy to clarify in the follow-up questions. But again, the objective of the MPMF is to follow the different steps of the MDMS impact assessment study and to consult as much as possible. And to end this presentation, I will just give you also an overview of the next steps, both very early next steps, but also more long-term until we come up with a proposal in 2022. Those two proposals, the MTMS revision and the MDMS initiative, will be supported by an impact assessment and cost-benefit analysis study. The study will be clearly separated into two key parts, one looking specifically at Mmtis and one looking at the objectives and problem drivers that I have presented earlier for MDMS. The study should hopefully start now very imminently at the beginning of January. We are finalizing the contract with the contractor, and it will include, of course, consultation steps. We will organize stakeholder workshops. So in January, just after the holidays, we will also be able to give you an overview of the timing and the timetable that we have agreed with the contractant to consult. We will have targeted interviews. So we will reach out to you and we will need your expertise to specify and clarify the policy measures and also the problems to make sure that we are on the right track to achieve our common objectives. And finally, I just also wanted to flag that the open public consultation, both for the revision of Mmtis and for MDMS, is open. You have the link also here on the slide, and it will be ongoing until the 23rd of February. That was it from my side. I hope it was clear. I have tried to be complete, but surely there are follow-up questions and very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoire. So now we can address some questions. I will first give the floor also to the representatives of our member states, partners of the project. Please, Julia.
So, hello from my side. Hello from my side.
Hello.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this very interesting overview. The MDMS initiative you raise is very welcome, addressing the market challenges. We also identified that exchanging tariff data and ticketing and the distribution is a very challenging task. So we are very much looking forward to that. But the question I actually want to raise is addressing the MMTI's revision. Which data categories will be added. That from the member state point of view, that's a very, very important information to be prepared. And which data categories, especially real-time data, are expected to become mandatory? Yes, and then to be provided, of course, via the NAP.
Thank you, Julia. So on the data categories, I was mentioning that this will need to be assessed very thoroughly with a cost-benefit analysis. Mm-hmm. We also have the Mmtis expert group that will follow the revision. For the real-time data that we want to add, let's say, it's really the real-time data that are currently in the annex of the delegated regulation. We know that we have around 7 to 8 member states who at present have opted for those dynamic data to be mandatory. So we are on the right trajectory. And now collectively, we will look if it can be the case for all member states. So the data already present in the annex of Mmtis delegated regulation. Now we were also wondering, should we add new data categories? And the one category that we have on our radar, let's say, is the question of occupancy. This came up specifically in the context of the COVID crisis, that passengers want to know about the occupancy in public transport, but also in also for long distance. It can to some extent be relevant. So this is something that we need to look into, taking into account always the cost that it represents for the operators, and also the relevance and how to which extent we go in the quality of this occupancy data category, because we have to see how it needs to be refined. So this is a discussion that we will have to have collectively. But again, it has to be based on a cost-benefit analysis. If in fine we see that it's too costly, then we will have to see if it can not be mandatory, but also just a recommendation. So this is up for discussion, really.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I see also another question from the chat. I think we have some time that we can spend on this. So the question comes from Annabelle Wett, and is about the decision to divorce as it's expressed here, to divorce the governance of MDMS from Mmtis on ticketing. And the question from Annabelle is it not risky to separate the two and make the technical aspect dependent on the delegated regulation rather than its own legislation, which is more easily revised, updated?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something we were wondering also when developing the framework. But on Mmtis, we will still very much focus on information. The only technical aspect of ticketing service that we will look into is this issue of standards. And again, we can always also make reference in MDMS to Mmtis. There will be bridges. It's the same timetable. It's the same impact assessment, cost-benefit analysis study. So the bridges will be there between the two. And in MDMS, we will really look at the more commercially sensitive data exchange. At present, our idea is to ensure that our preferred option, our preferred policy option, I can be quite transparent about this because it's also in our inception impact assessment, is to say that operators should have the freedom to enter or not in a commercial agreement with a third party. So we will really keep this framework, but when they do, we will establish the conditions in MDMS for the commercial agreements, and maybe refine through this also certain aspects related to data exchange. So we presented technical market, but there will be bridges between the two, and Mmtis for ticketing services will actually only really look into the mass interfaces standards. So I hope it's clear, Annabelle, and anyway, we will have time also to discuss this in further meetings.
Yes, and probably some more questions might be raised later on that make it more clear, or other ideas will be expressed. Okay, if we don't have another question so far, I would continue with next presentation. I see a question from Eve. Probably we can also have time to address that if it's quick.
Yeah.
Eve Ansler from UITP has a technical question on the MPMF working group. It mentions the creation of sub-working groups. How many and when?
So in the call, you have indeed the mention of a subgroup. At the moment, if we will only have a plenary, and if needed in the future, we kept in the decision the flexibility to potentially create subgroups. But given the sensitive timeline that we have, and as we want to involve everyone, for now, it will only be a plenary of the MPMF. And if needed in the future, we will create subgroup. But we want to make sure stakeholders are involved in the study, so we need to act quite quickly and to set it up quite quickly. So that's why we only have one group at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoire. I think this is clear. So let's move on with the second presentation. Comes from Stefan Jugend from ERA. So please, Stefan, share your screen. And if you can put it also in PowerPoint.
Yes, I will do. A few seconds. So
great.
It should be visible now.
Great. Yes.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name is Stefan Jugend. I'm working for the European Union Agency for Railways, and I would like to present you here now the vision and experience from our agency and the rail sector around the multimodal travel information systems and the telematics applications for the passengers that have TSI. I have foreseen to address here the following topics in the discussion today. I would like to address what is the TAP TSI, because maybe some of you are not aware what kind of regulation it is, what is the framework for this. Then I would like to explain what are the links between the TAP TSI and the MMTIS. And I would like to give you a short overview about the revision of the TAP TSI and the achievements we did in the last year, and the things which will come in the new regulation, in the revised regulation, which was addressed briefly already by Victoire, that this is also a regulation to be taken into account here for the discussion. First of all, I would like to show you what is the regulation, telematics applications for passenger services. This is a regulation for rail distribution used in the single European railway area, and it's legally binding within EU. And here you see it's, let's say, not a quite new regulation. It's already in place since 10 years now. And it's called a technical specification for interoperability relating to the subsystem telematics applications for passenger services. At this time still of the Trans-European Railway System. Now it's called Single European Railway Area. And this is a regulation, as I said, legally binding within EU for railway undertakings, for infrastructure managers and for ticket vendors, if they're selling rail services, because they are addressed as well by this regulation. And the regulation defines some further technical details. And for the technical details, for instance, how to exchange those data, we refer to so-called European standards, like Transmodal, NetEx, Theory, or we refer to technical documents where we have seen there is no regulation, there is no standard in place, or it's a topic quite specific for rail. And these are technical documents managed by our agency, and they are annexed to the regulation. What kind of functions are supported by this legally binding regulation within railways? And here we have a long list of functions which are integrated in the regulation, and where we have defined in the regulation what are the conditions, how to exchange some information, who has to exchange the information, and what kind of technical specifications have to be used. And here we are covering more or less the whole distribution process from the first information about what is available for a passenger, about the conditions of carriage, until the data exchange with other transport modes, means once I'm arrived in a station, in a final station by train, how I can continue my trip to the final destination. So, and I would like to start with the part info, where we distribute your information and publish the so-called conditions of carriage, means what are the conditions applicable for a passenger to use a train, what are the conditions applicable for certain tariffs which are offered by the railway undertakings. And here we address specifically things like how to take your bike on the train and what are the conditions for, how people with reduced mobility can use the train, what are the conditions, what are the tickets, what are the services available for them. And we address as well the quite specific topic of car transport by train, still exists in Europe and it's used in some member states, and the transport of registered luggage. This is mainly linked as well with the rail passenger rights regulation, which has also the conditions for the passenger to be fulfilled within. And all these topics are coming to a certain extent from the rail passenger rights regulation, where the TSI here provides the technical means to support the implementation of the rail passenger rights regulation concerning the information provision to the passenger. And then we are talking in the second point about the timetable data exchange. And here I have to underline, we are talking about timetable data, means a package of data you have to process as receiver of the data to feed your journey planner, for instance. And here we have the clear obligation to provide those timetable data by passenger railway undertakings to other railway undertakings and so-called third parties, so for instance, travel agencies or travel agents dealing with those data and providing our own journey planner. Then we are talking as well in the TSI about the tariff data exchange. And here we have to limit this for the time being because regulation in force has here some limits. We are talking on first point about the exchange of tariff data intended for so-called international and foreign sales to other railway undertakings and to third parties. Means we are covering currently in the regulation international and foreign sales, means tariffs which are foreseen for cross-border trains or trains you can sell for another member state. We have already a basic parameter or paragraph within the regulation saying you have also to provide domestic tariff data, but you see here asterisks, those domestic data are currently not standardized in railways, so there are standards on domestic level may be available in some member states, but it's not a European standard in place. And here we have proposed in the recommendation in a revision to change this and using also standards which are European ones. I will come back to this later. Then we are talking here about bookings, means you have to be able to reserve seats, bike places or PRM seats in a train. You can reserve as well assistance in a station if you would like to change, for instance, with a wheelchair, the trains, that the needed assistance is provided for you in a station. Then in the fifth point, we are talking about ticketing, and here we have for the time being integrated the so-called RCT2 ticket. It's a classical paper-based ticket, which is still in use in Europe in many countries. And a ticket as home printed ticket means a ticket you print today with a barcode and you can use it later on to travel by train. Then furthermore, we have here a bullet point about the real-time information. That means that the real-time information about the train run, for instance, delays, rerouting or cancellation, have to be provided to the passenger. And the last point is we exchange as well data with other transport modes, mainly about, we are talking about a timetable and tariff data, but as well real-time data are addressed by this. Coming to the so-called technical documents, this are also standards which are attached to the TSI and describing in detail how to exchange those standards, those data. And here we have so-called technical documents which are annexed to the TSI, means they are legally binding, and And this is an advantage for these documents. They are not new because they were derived from UIC leaflets, and they were derived in such a way that they are now integrated as technical documents in the TSI, allowing us to exchange the data. And I would like to highlight only here these different data which can be exchanged. So the technical documents B1 to B3 are used to exchange tariff data, as I said, for international and foreign sales. Technical document B4 provides here the implementation guide for artifact messages, means the exchange of timetable data. B5, it's the definition of the reservation interfaces. Technical documents B6 and B7 are dealing with ticketing. B8 and B9 are dealing with some reference data. So for instance, how to identify railway undertakings, not only in Europe at the end, because due to the history of this document is shared as well with other organizations outside of EU, like OSGD for the former Soviet Union railway undertakings and beyond, and as well shared with railways operating under OTIF. Means we have also links here to other legal areas, to other cooperation areas for railways, and we have to harmonize also these data between those different groups. And the last point is technical document B10. It's concerning the electronic reservation of assistance for persons with reduced mobility. The documents are available on the link I've shown here below, and you can download them free of charge from this website. For the next topic, I would like to come to the question, what are the links between the existing TAP TSI for rail and the MMTS regulation? And here I would address mainly the TSI basic parameter management of connections with other transport modes, with other modes of transport, and as well as Article 4, accessibility, exchange and reuse of static travel and traffic data in the MMTS. And here, as you can see, we have recommended, means it's not yet legally binding, but it's a recommendation from the agency to the European Commission to exchange those data based on European standards. Means NETEX, means Siri, and use for tariff data, for stop and station data and timetable data, these standards to exchange the data, and for real-time data to be exchanged with other transport modes. We are also referring to the European standards if you exchange the data with other transport modes. On the other hand, what you can see on the right-hand side, the MMTS regulation refers as well to the TSI, to the TAP TSI. And here the MMTS allows use NETEX and subsequent versions, but as well technical documents defined in the regulation. TAP TSI is the number 454 from 2011, means you can use NETEX as well under the umbrella of MMTS, but to avoid here the double publication of data, you can use as well the formats which are supported by TAP TSI I've just shown in the previous slide concerning the technical documents. And here the picture showing what is the current picture for the data exchange. So you have already the TSI on the upper side of this slide, where you can see the data which are exchanged within the TSI based on TAP TSI standards, as you can see in the blue arrows. And you have a part of the data which have to be shared with public transport, with other transport modes. I'm mentioning here timetable data, tariff data, and real-time data, where we are using already the possibility to use standards which are European ones and not technical documents which are currently mostly used and implemented for rail. Within rail, we are using specific standards for ticketing and reservation messages, which are quite unique, but okay, something which has to be discussed, how far we can go here also with the harmonization for this. And here is a slide commenting here these points again for the rail-specific data exchange standards and NETEX to show how far we have already further developed a rail-specific data exchange, means within the railway world, means within the single European railway railway area, and the standards used or standards like NetEx. The data exchange for international rail is largely based on developments of the rail sector. So we have here these UIC leaflets I just mentioned, which have been transformed to a certain extent into top TSI technical documents for the distribution. And we have international railway solutions, which are published as well by UIC, but mainly focused on the rail sector. So taking into account some requirements from other transport modes, but still mainly focused on the rail sector. And we have here the basic parameter for the data exchange with other transport modes. And this parameter, as I've shown, is used to exchange rail data with other modes. And here we propose in our recommendations that NetEx should be the format to be used. NetEx should be the format to be used to exchange the data with other transport modes to minimize here the impact of data transformation. We have always discussion in the rail sector so that the used standards are mode specific, and we analyzed therefore in several studies how European standards such as NetEx may be used to exchange timetable data, tariff data for international and domestic tariffs, but as well data about the accessibility of railway stations and how far we can integrate those European standards into the regulation telematics application for passenger services for rail. Conclusion based on the studies is rail data can be exchanged using European standards. And I would like to show you on the next slide one example what we did and what we analyzed. I have shown, for instance, the technical document B1 in the slides about the technical documents. It's a document describing the so-called non-reservation tickets. These are tickets you can buy everywhere in Europe for many origin destinations as international tickets, and it's still possible to buy here a cross-border ticket, for instance, from France through Belgium to a station in Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, based on this tariff. And one data element for this tariff is, of course, you need to know which stations are included in this tariff, because the tariff is not covering all stations in Europe, so you have only the most important ones where it could be most likely that this station is also interesting for international travelers. And here you have on the left-hand side the data structure which is modeled in the top TSI to define, okay, what kind of stations we have, what is a list of stations, and what kind of data are contained within. So you see here there is a validity, there is an undertaking supporting this station, and for the station you have information, what is the name of the station, is there a station code, and is there a so-called border point code linked with the station, means when the responsibility is transferred from one undertaking to another, usually at the state border. It's based on this tariff scheme, and it's a needed requirement for this. On the right-hand side, you see the corresponding model here, which is modeled within NetEx, means this standard which is available from SEL. And here you could see we have created in the study a mapping between the standard which is used in telematics application for passengers on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side NetEx. And as you can see, most of the items were covered already, but on the bottom you can see some specific points which were not included before, so a fare scheduled stop point and extension stop point, a border point to show how these data can be exchanged as well with NetEx to have your compatibility with the standard B1, which is integrated in the top TSI as technical documents.
Sorry, Stefan, just
yes?
to inform you that you have around a couple of minutes to conclude.
Yes.
Thank you.
And here I think it's only for later on. If you would like to check these studies in detail, we have here some links for the available documents, how to come from one standard to another and to map the data between Rail and NetEx. And coming to the last slides, these are the slides of the revision of the TAP TSI, where I would like to give you an outlook what we have done in the last years to modify the TSI to incorporate here new requirements and enlarge a bit here these technical standards we are using. The TAP TSI revision is a part of a revision package we have got from the European Commission to revise all technical specifications for interoperability. And it's foreseen to publish this recommendation December or January next year. We will see how fast we can process this in-house because the documents are more or less ready. And to refine the technical documents until June 2022. And here we have some key points where we have changed a bit the legislation compared to the presentation I have held a few minutes ago about the current content. And our proposal is for the timetable exchange to ensure as well the possibility to exchange timetable data for rail with NetEx and as well to harmonize with the other transport modes. And it's now also reflected in the legislations that we are using for both NetEx. For rail, it's an option. We can use as well the technical documents we have in the regulation, but NetEx is now as well allowed as other alternative. The same holds for tariff data exchange, where we have now the international and foreign sales tariffs you can exchange as well based on NetEx, beside of the technical documents we have here in the TSI itself. And for domestic rail tariffs, we propose to use only NetEx because we couldn't identify any standard which is available for the data exchange. And for other transport modes, it's the same. We propose NetEx only. Furthermore, we addressed here the ticketing and enlarged a bit the scope by covering e-ticketing without media. And we refined as well the barcodes and the key exchange for the electronic ticketing and put it on the technical documents to define it with more up-to-date standards. We will propose as well here a standard to provide ticket control data, means once you check a ticket on the train, how to exchange here the data and how to provide here the information to those undertakings which have printed the ticket. We will discuss here the integration of a full service model initiative, OSDM, and we took this into account as booking interface. We discussed about the interface for accessibility data and for the data exchange based on NetEx. We merged real-time data for TAF and TAP TSI, also to fulfill the rail passenger rights regulation. And this comes to the future data exchange once the recommendation is approved and published as new regulation. And here it could look like as such as proposed in the recommendations that we converge the standards a bit more and more coming from the railway world and the public transport world, allowing as well within railways to exchange the data based on European standards and as well to harmonize here the data exchange with the other transport modes further so that we can integrate the data easier and as well support by a more standardized data exchange the goal of the European Commission to provide until 2030 here a multimodal ticket and interoperable ticketing. I would like to thank you for this presentation, and now I'm available for your questions.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I see some questions in the chat. Probably I will start with João, who represents Portugal also in our project, as is a partner of the project. So please, João, I think you can also speak if you want to say your question.
Yes, hello to all. My question is a basic question, just if TAP TSI is applied to subways or just to heavy rail, and that is the main question, because we have some interfaces that have subways and some train stations, heavy train stations, and how we make this correlation between the heavy and the subway trains if the TAP TSI it's applied to the subways.
No, the interoperability directive where the TAP TSI is based on is not applicable for subways. So TAP TSI is mainly covering heavy rail, and there are some rail systems which can be exempted from the rail passenger rights, from the interoperability directive, and these are usually networks which are fully separated and which are not linked to the European railway system. Those networks you can exempt, and then also the TAP TSI might not be applicable for them. But it's a decision of the member states.
Thank you, Stefan.
Okay, any other question from the member states? Because before I check from the other participants. No. Okay, I see a comment regarding what is more or less the position of TAP TSI or ERA regarding the use of European standards, NetEx and CIRI. So I see a comment here that it's good that the rail will support NetEx and that is seen as an alternative. If you want to comment something on that, Stefan.
As I said, we are having NetEx for the data exchange with other transport modes as the data standard to be used or to be recommended. It's not a mandatory obligation for other transport modes, but we recommend in the TSI to use NetEx. And for rail, it's now included in the recommendation as alternatives. You may use for tariff data the standards which are already covered in the TSI, means the technical documents. We will add a new technical document OSDM, but as alternative, we added as well NetEx to exchange tariff data, and the same holds for timetable data as alternative. But if you're using already Edifact for timetable data, you can continue to use.
Thank you. I think now it's clearer what is your position. And I have also another question that was addressed by a member state partner of the project, probably is not here now. And the question was regarding the harmonization of legislation on passenger rights, because in rail sector this issue is quite important. And the question that we had, I think, from Czech Republic is there a plan to raise this point to the revision?
Yes, this was one of the, let's say, key discussion points in the revision. Rail passenger rights regulation has now published in June this year, and we have some requirements which have to be covered also by technical specifications. So, as I told already in the presentation, we have here some basic information which has to be provided towards the passengers. It is mainly based on the rail passenger rights regulation. But now we have two important changes in the rail passenger rights regulation. One is you have to provide as infrastructure manager and railway undertaking some real-time data as well now to other actors which are addressed in the TSI, means ticket vendors, means so-called tour operators. And they have also now the right to receive real-time data. And we just proposed, it's in the recommendation, to use the same messages which are already in place in the rail sector implemented to provide the real-time information as well to those actors. Secondly,
okay, I see also, sorry.
Yeah, secondly, opening of booking interfaces. This is also something where we have the ticket vendors already in place, and we just enhance the TSI by a new document provided by the rail sector OSDM, also to further develop here the booking system. So there is a close link between rail passenger rights regulation and the TAP TSI, and we took this into account in the revision.
Thank you. There are also some other comments regarding TAP TSI and NetEx CIRI. There is also a question about if UIC is going to provide the data in NetEx and CIRI. I don't know if you have any information.
No, this is, I think, a question for UIC, and as far as I can see, the answer was confirmed by UIC. It's not the intention now, but it's as I said, it's only an optional use, an alternative. we still stick to the technical documents, but introduce NetEx as alternative as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. So now I will give the floor to Thierry Legrand from Sensenelec. Please, Thierry, you can share your screen. And I remind also that we will have a second round of questions and answers at the end. So just now, to save time, we pass with the presentations, but if you have more questions for Stefan or for Victoire, you can also post it now. Please, Thierry.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you very much. So, in this context of the event of today, I will try to make a kind of link between the two legislation that were presented by both Victoire and Stefan. But I need first to remind that what we are doing, who we are, Sensenelec and ETSI. So we are the three European standardization organization, and we develop European standard based on the input of the 34 member countries who are member of Senelec. Also, we are connected with the ISO IEC ITU system, so we are connected through agreements with the global perspective. And the important point in the context of supporting standard, supporting legislation with standard, is that we are a recognized organization. We are the three recognized organizations under the EU regulation 1025/2012. And in fact, through Sensenelec and ETSI, ISO IEC can also be recognized as a possible input to the regulation they need to support. So this is giving simply a copy of the article, which is the base of the flow of information and the development of the standard in the context of the EU regulation. And the fact is very important. Our main task as Sensenelec is to reduce the divergence of the specification. So by developing a unique European standard, we succeed to remove 34 national standards, because currently there are 34 members, of course the EU countries, the EFTA countries, plus Turkey, UK, and some countries who will become members of the European Union in the later stage. So big impact and big task to simplify the landscape. In the context of the current workshop, we work with a SEN Technical Committee, SEN TC 278, and in particular with the Working Group 3, who is convened by Emmanuel de Verdal, present in this workshop as well. And this working group has already published 35 documents, and of course, basically, it is the working group developing the series Transmodel NetEx series plus other European standards, which really facilitate the intermodal transport. It is very important, of course, to realize that it is extremely difficult in the area of intermodal to have a common view. There are a lot of divergent specification created by the business, and we are very lucky that in the context of intermodal transport for passenger, we have a common, let's say, backbone. So this slide was already shown in a different way by Stefan. Just to re-emphasize that we we are with the transmodal NetX series, we are supporting the Mmtis regulation and ITS directive. Not go too far into the detail, but I wish also to give a little bit of information about what has been explained in more generic term by Stefan about the interrelation between the SEN system and the UIC system. So you know that we have SEN is basing the development of standard on national standardization members, but of course we are in connection with over 300 business organizations, and UIC is one of them. And so it was very natural that we try to understand better what is the connection between the transmodal NetX series system and what I will call here the OSDM merits, because OSDM merits are the two, let's say, referential merits being a database, OSDM being more kind of standard for transfer. We are wishing to, let's say, understand and provide a common vision and a possibility to interface, as explained also by Stefan, the data, because there are a lot of passengers who never use, or very rarely, international heavy rail transport, but will use national and regional transport. So it is very important that we have a common backbone. We are also taking input from shift to rail activities. So what we did in the context, we have, as it often happens in standardization, we created a group of coordination, which is called ITS, Intermodal Back Office Coordination Group, where we have colleagues from, as I mentioned, CENTC 278, TC9X, which is railway, UIC, UITP, Shift to Rail, All Rails, and ERA, DG Move, etc. And in fact, we started already in September 2020, following some requests which were made at the level of a more generic sectorial fora, which is the joint GPC Rail, which is a strategic group where SENS and Delegated and key associations are involved. We decide to have an enlarged coordination group. And after a series of discussion, there was two key priorities, and I will speak here, of course, because it is the context of this workshop. I will speak only on what we call the back office coordination group, which is trying to dig in the match between the two standards I mentioned above. So we focus on fare management and on timetable. So since in the beginning we had, of course, need for trying to see how we would tackle the job, and since May 2021 we have created two other groups in order to develop the case studies, to try to identify the gaps. And those two working groups are related to fare management and to timetable. And so regularly we have also a coordination group where, of course, SEN Management Center, I mean myself and my colleagues are present, but also colleagues from DG Move, from ERA, and from the two units of DG Move and from ERA, and from Shift to Rail as well. So the two task groups are explained here. So we have a task group on fares, which is in fact led by Emmanuel de Verdal. And the goal is to compare OSDM and transmodal ecosystem, while there is a second task group chaired by Fabrice Seta, who is from UIC, who is focusing on comparing Edifact and NetX series. So it is really what was explained by Stefan. The UIC is working mainly on Edifact, but there would be a possibility, of course, to use the NetX series system. And so we are trying to investigate how to match the two systems. And it is basically what we are doing. And the outcome of this two other group is will be an input to the studies, the NAPCOR study, and also an input to the Commission in order to define and finalize their legal act, which they are developing currently and which were presented earlier by Victoire and by Stefan. So basically, my key message is that yes, we can do a matching between two different systems, but the systems are often based on different architecture, so it is extremely time consuming. We are working on the case I explained before since already 4 months, and we certainly need 4 additional months to finalize some conclusion. So it is a lot of energy, and Sen would not like to have to do this too often with various business development model. I think my conclusion would be that we need really, for the intermodal transport of passengers, we need really to have a backbone, and this backbone must be based on the transmodal system. And of course, we can further develop because standards are continuously reviewed and fine-tuned and complemented. But this is really the challenge that we have to work on a common backbone. I will stop now there, and I'm ready for the question.
Thank you very much, Thierry. We have quite a big debate from questions that or comments that concern NetX and City, transmodal in general, and how this supports the rail sector. So you said something. Your position is that transmodal is going to be the backbone. Is that what you recommend? Let's say.
Yeah. For sure. I'm selling my product, but obviously the transmodal system, transmodal Siri NetX system, is a system which has been built, as I explained, on needs of all stakeholders, because Sen and Senelec are by essence an open system. We are building standard on consensus. We have to take into account all the interests, including the small and medium enterprise, the trade unions, let's say the consumers, etc. And so basically, this series has been developed over years and years. There has been a lot of, let's say, research and development project. We still get some input from Shift to Rail to improve the system. And obviously, we are wishing to complement the series. And so, yes, we are open to see what are the needs of the UIC community, but we have to avoid that there is a creation of too many, let's say, business models, because it's extremely difficult to compare ontology and architecture of system, and very time consuming. And so my final keywords would be do not reinvent the wheel.
Thank you very much, Thierry. I was also wondering if there are further, we heard about some activities that will help coordination and harmonization between the different initiatives. What are the further steps for Sentinel, like also in how to coordinate and harmonize SEN activities inside SEN, but also with ISO and the other worldwide standardization bodies?
I think I will start, but well, Emmanuel de Verdal is also in the room, and as he is the convener, he is probably better aware of the strategy of the working group and the next step. But as I said, this coordination group I introduced this morning will deliver some conclusion that we need to deliver, I think, around May, June next year, because, as you know, the Commission is developing some legal elements, and we need to input those legal elements. I know that in the context of Transmodel, there is a new project which is called OPRA, which is more connected to operation, which is in the pipe and need to be further elaborated. But for the other element, if Emmanuel could intervene, I would like to intervene.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Thierry, and thank you everyone for this very interesting discussion. I follow it in the chat as well, and I would like to say that we are here in the debate, which is really at the core of today stakeholders forum objective and topics. We are dealing with regulation, with data format, with data mobility data categories, and I would say that the main objective for all of us is to make sure that such mobility data are made available in a consistent and quality-based outcome. So I would say that the data format itself should be considered as a technical tool to make this happening. But what we really need first is to make sure that the requirements, as defined in the regulations, are clear and are well implemented. And that's also really important to take into account all the work which already exists. And I would say that my personal experience around this standardization process is that sometimes everyone, when the new requirements or an extension of requirements is popping up, the first reflex sometimes is to reinvent the wheel because of not taking into account of past experience and already existing tools. So what I would like to make sure, and that's one of also the main goal at standardization level, is to secure that existing standards are implemented, are potentially extended, and that's basically what we are doing in Transmodel since a long time, since more than 1 decade, even before, of course, I'm joined as convener of WG3, but really we need to take care that this existing material is adopted and implemented before trying to reinvent something, because in terms of consistency, in terms of efficiency, adoption, that's really important to secure what's already existing. And if there are some gaps, of course, that's important to evaluate how we can fill, how we can extend, how we can add something. But again, the data format is really a tool there. So what I strongly suggest, and that's one of the main goals we have right now in such coordination group, is first to evaluate what's existing and how to make sure that this can be harmonized. And that's basically also, as mentioned Victor in introduction, one of the main objectives of a new European project, which is called NAPCOR, which really aims to secure this harmonization based on, of course, existing standards, existing implementation, and ready to make the glue between all these initiatives before starting again something new.
Thank you very much, Manuel. I see still the debate to go on in the chat, but I would like to give the floor also to Yves because he has his perspective on these challenges representing UITP, and I would like to ask the audience to raise their hands and comment directly during the question and answer time slot that we save for the end. And then you can have the possibility to raise your comments and to express your questions directly. So we will unmute you then. And you can say your words and ask for replies from all the panelists. So I will give the floor to Yves, as I said. I will share the screen for Yves, so just a moment. Okay, so Yves, please, you may start.
Thank you, Anastasia. I can see from the chat that there are many issues which are under huge discussion. My presentation shall be rather general, and I shall stay general due to the lack of time, but I shall make some practical recommendations as well. So next slide, please. The first slide is just to present a rough landscape as regards passenger public transport, which we are talking about today. You can see figures which are previous COVID, I would say, but they are rough figures. You have in the air sector 150 airlines and 200 airports, and this represents about 1.5 billion passengers per year. In the rail sector, you have 580 railway undertakings and about 30, probably more than 30,000 stations, but most of them are local stations, and they are not part of these. They are not presented always in the API we have on mainline rail. They represent 2 billion passengers per year, and this covers long and medium distance. And you have also part of 6 billion passengers per year, which are regional, suburban, which are part, in fact, of local public transport. We have a problem with the word rail due to the fact that you can see, if you look at the local public transport, that there you have not only a very huge number of PTAs, over 2,500, but you have, we don't know how many, but dozens of thousands of PTOs. And in terms of local bus PT and as a whole PT stops, it's hundreds of thousands stops on which you may need at the end to provide information both on static and dynamic data. And these local public transport sector represent 50 billion passengers per year, 30 billion for the bus, 10 billion for the metro, and the metro is not represented in the Stefan Hugelt slides on MMTIS and TAP-TSI. You have 10 billion for tram light rail, and you have most part of the 6 billion so-called rail passengers per year, which are mostly operated under public service obligations. So the local rail, 10 million metro plus 10 million tram plus part of most of the part of billion local rail represent, if you compare to the 2 billion long and medium distance, something which makes us challenge the fact that when we talk about rail at EU level, it covers a very, very low number of rail uses. Next slide, please. So we have, in fact, a very complex background regarding public passenger transport. We have a multiplicity of different transport modes. We have the air, we have the rail, I mentioned. Local public transport, it's road and rail and waterborne. And it's conventional and flexible, part of on-demand services. And we have alternative modes, currently road-based, maybe tomorrow air taxi, but these alternative modes are already covered by Transmodal Part 10, and they represent, in percentage, 2%, 3% of local public transport, not more. The mass services are very, very limited in number in terms of information to be provided to passengers. For each mode, you have a multiplicity of territories, customers, actors, and the territories are not organized. And the different governance models are not organized on the same institutional background in the various member states. And we have also a very big difference in the open services and the PSO services, but it's important to note that both sectors are regulated. And we have a multiplicity of different travel services. You have the transport services on which you board when using a vehicle. You have the other tangible travel services when you have a connected service which needs to be accessed by transport, but which are travel between on a trip between an origin and a destination. And you have the intangible travel services, which are all those services which are used when you have APIs, ticketing, and things like that. And all this has to be taken into account when you talk about travel. You have, of course, a multiplicity of different MMTIS applications. It's a very difficult way to find the right one and to trust the information which is provided on the API. And you have, of course, a multiplicity of different specifications provided by many platforms in addition to the Senelec specifications. Next slide, please. So, yeah, well, of course, from the previous slide, the conclusion, the important conclusion is that we need for coordination, either mandatory or voluntary, depending on the various sub-market. So a key challenge is to clarify the conceptual definitions. In fact, there are in various legislations and in various platforms, words which are used, which have a meaning which is not always the same. You have words like transport, travel, mobility, multimodality, digital services, competent authorities, interoperability. Interoperability for ITS is different from interoperability for rail and the SERA. You have a problem of passengers and or freight services, which are they separate? Are they combined? We can see that for rail, they are often combined. There are TAP and TAF, which have common data and data management. Traffic. What is traffic? What is transit? Transit, when you are between two flights, you are in transit, but transit is also when you use metro or a tram. Transfer, modal shift, contracts, all this shows that you have different definitions in different legislation. You have a misunderstanding and different interpretations, and very often the terminologies are differing from the common language we use. Everyone, just the word train, for example, it's an example. And translation is an issue due to the fact that specifications are produced in English, but when used in different countries in their local APIs, the translation might not be the right one. So we need reference for EC definitions in EC legislation. Maybe we could imagine something like essential definitions similar to what are called the essential requirements for rail in the Interoperability Directive. So essential definitions so that everyone knows what they start from. We need for a translation in all EU language, a proper way to make sure that they refer to the reality. We need for common European minimum stable European profiles, that's work and Data4PT. We need for an easy and open access to EU standard. It's a question which has been discussed a bit in the chat. And we need for simplified send process to edit and publish documents. probably. All this can be discussed later. I have a short time and I don't want to take too much time. So next one, please. A key challenge for me, for UITP, is that we should provide guidance, and transmodal has been presented in the MMTIS as the underlying conceptual data reference model for public transport. It's as mentioned by Emmanuel, it provides metadata to build services for all land public transport modes, including the alternative modes, the new ones. And the question is, are there gaps not covered by transmodal? Probably not. But what's important here in terms of message is that we need for agreed concepts, and that transmodal can be the reference conceptual PT data model. And I would add that there is probably a need to get, in addition to these essential definitions in the legislation, to get some kind of reference glossary or data dictionary. Glossary, it's a term that when you talk with the experts of TC 278 Working Group 3, would not lead to a change request due to the fact that there are too many changes, but having some kind of data dictionary, and there is one in transmodal, could be probably a good thing. Next one, please. A key challenge is to know what we are talking about. And in my opinion, we need to clarify and typify the various digital mobility domains and their interfaces. I list here many of them. I will probably not go in all of them due to the fact that we will not have enough time. But, well, I mentioned some of them at least. Passenger transport versus freight transport. Who is responsible for what? Passenger transport, you have road versus public transport. The road traffic management is not under the same framework and legal institutional organization than public transport. You have the problem of what is defined at EU level versus national travel versus metropolitan travel versus against EU travel, the fact that there is this overall coordination to implement. Of course, a problem of commercial services versus public services. They are, as I said, all regulated, but which weight to give to one or the other. You have the problem between travel modes and travel services. In local public transport, services are organized on a hierarchical basis, which means that you have a backbone which is made of rail, tram, metro, and you have bus and other services which are feeder services. So, and they are already, most of them, integrated with a single information system and a single ticketing system. And its issue is that these coordination is not done by operators when you have many operators on a given local area or operating under PSOs, but under the PTAs or something which is responsible for this integration, which exists in most of the very big cities. And so you have, you have also the time dimension, and you have the problem of what is sustainable mobility. Well, I will not, I think you have also the number of platforms, even within CEN, even between CEN and ISO, between the NAPs, between NAP and local authorities for mobilities when they exist. So many interfaces to address, and a huge need to identify who is doing what on either side of these mobility domains, where the interface has to be defined and coordinated. Next slide, please. And it will be my last slide. I think we should agree on principles for these coordination actions on harmonizations, which are needed. We should have. It should be made clear that sustainable mobility must be given priority. Mobility in its relation with the Green Deal, but also in relation with the land use and with the other external effects created by the various public transport. We need to make sure that digital mobility cannot be an obstacle for non-connected citizens. We need to serve consumers, connected consumers, etc., but we need to serve citizens as well. PRM, every local, many categories of citizens which which need public services under PSOs. We need to understand and not constrain. We should not have someone saying what is good for one sector can be applied on the other and must be applied in the other. We need to be emphatic and realistic and not dogmatic. We need to be flexible and scalable along long-lasting shared political agreements. We need to allow decisions implementation effectiveness. It's very difficult for the local public transport due to the number of stakeholders at stake. We need to be ambitious for the long term, but we need to be pragmatic for the short term. We need to involve the representative, legitimate stakeholders. Not all of them are part of all these discussions. We need to clarify the relation between the EC, the NAP and what I call the local mobility authorities, and we need that every level respect the legitimacy of the others. We need to encourage coordination at metropolitan level of competent authorities, and it's not the same from one country to the other, and you have in some countries local PTAs, but in some others it's still municipalities or it's the region and the way they are addressed are not the same. And when it's proposed to develop sustainable urban mobility plans, we don't know exactly who can propose these sustainable mobility plans and what are the level of commitments of the various stakeholders which are involved in the studies about the sustainable mobility plans. I would recommend the creation and empowerment of decentralized, what I would call sustainable mobility authorities, which have a wider competence than only public transport in a city. We should clarify the relationship between local and global, so TNT modes and local nodes where most of the trips end or start. We need, of course, to provide adequate financial and human resources and relevant funding. It's a big challenge, and we should make sure that when a decision is made, the decision maker is also partly committed for funding. Due to the fact that if you implement an obligation to a local PTO or PTA, maybe in some cases the service will be just cancelled due to the lack of resources, additional resources required by the decision taken at a higher level. So I think I have finished with this one, and it's a huge presentation, many things. It's just for debate. And,
Thank you very much, Yves. I think you have summarized quite big challenges regarding MMTIS legislation, but not only. So now I would open the floor to everybody who would like to comment or to ask a question. And this can be done by you raise your hands. You can raise your hands and we can unmute you if you want to say something. And otherwise, I have also some questions that have been collected by member states, but they have been also revealed with the interaction that we have in the framework of the support that we give to several stakeholders. I see a hand. So from Fabrizio Arneotto from Italy. Fabrizio, you are now unmuted. I mean, you can allow your microphone. Yeah. Great. We can hear you, I think. The microphone is on, but we cannot hear you. So there is a technical problem, I guess. I can start meanwhile with some questions that I have from Denmark. So Denmark is asking what deadlines are expected for the implementation on national level of Mmtis. And there is also a question regarding the B2B commercial agreements. How should ensure a business case for services to resell mobility products? And I would like to ask probably Victoire to reply on this, if possible.
Yes, many thanks, Anastasia. Maybe first on the question of deadlines, we already have in the existing delegated regulation certain deadlines to comply with the obligation. It is staged depending on the level of service of the data categories in the annex of Mmtis. And it is also depending on the geographical scope. For the future, for the revision of Mmtis, most probably we will have to think in a similar way, so staged implementation, and this will have to be discussed with member state experts in the context of the Mmtis expert group. So that's the answer I would give, taking into account that we have an objective in the strategy for 2030, of course. And then on the question of yeah, it was the commercial agreement, and it was sorry, can you just repeat it, Anastasia, again?
Yes, if there is an intention that the commercial agreements ensure a business case for service reselling mobility products.
Yeah. So on this one, I think you understood that the MDMS initiative, the idea is to try to give oxygen, meaning a business case for the digital services. So we will look into this question of fees to provide certainty for the third parties, but we need to find the equilibrium also with operators, and this is something we have highlighted many times. Our preferred option is not to force operator to enter into a commercial agreement. So what we would want is really to have a fair level playing field. And on top of this oxygen, let's say, business leeway that we would give to intermediaries, we still also want, and this is crucial for us, to make sure that the intermediaries developed support the policy goals, specifically in terms of sustainability. And it might imply also certain obligation in terms of a link with the sustainable urban mobility plans, information about the carbon footprint of the journey, etc. So yes, this question of business model is at the back of our mind, but it has to be balanced with the interest of operators and other parties also.
Thank you very much, Victoire. Then Fabrizio, yes, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Well, my question is relevant to the implementation and usage of the so-called profiles of the indicated protocols in the delegated regulation, so the NetEx, in particular the NetEx profile. In Italy, we have an important project that is moving the first steps in the context of Next Generation EU funds. Is a project concerning a mobility as a service framework. And as you can imagine, in this perspective, mobility data are very important. So my question is, since this could bring the opportunity to, let me say, enhance the NetEx and Siri profiles in order to address also mass use cases, My question is, at the European level, do you foresee any, I don't know, indication to be followed, common indication to be followed in the member states, or is delegated to the choice of the single member states for this? Thank you.
I think everybody can answer this who is in the panel. Probably, Victoire, is also a question addressed to you primarily, but I would say everybody can react.
So maybe I can start indeed. Thank you, Anastasia. In terms of the profiles, we rely very much on the work that is being done by Data4PT, and we do not foresee to go as much in detail. We also want to have the development of European profiles for NetEx and Siri. So we do not foresee to have any obligation in EU legislation on the profiles. This would be my answer, but it can be complemented also by other panelists indeed on the work that is being done.
Yeah, actually you made a good pass for us in Data4PT, and probably Manuel would like to complement on how, at least from Data4PT side, how we will support that, even though it's not directly regulated in Mmtis.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to confirm that in Data4PT, of course, the support for development of profile, in particular EU profile, is something really important. So we have already initiated some action, for example, around the NetEx European accessibility profile. We have in the pipes also FAIR NetEx European profile and a Siri European profile as well is now starting. So definitely it's important to support such profile development.
And as a complementary action, we also support the national profiles specifications development, and we have also recognized that it's quite important to exchange experiences between the member states. So we had already posted some very high level comparison between the existing profiles. I'm sharing now the links from our wiki page on around this topic. So I see hands. So I don't know who was first. It was you, Yves, or Stefan?
Maybe just to add, something important also in line with what I mentioned previously regarding this debate around the data category requirements and data format, just to highlight that profile is a very good example on how a single standard, which is the transmodel ecosystem, Siri and NetEx, can be then used to fit exactly with the different data categories according to regulation, or even European regulation and or each national regulation, and how this profile can really provide a clear answer of as regard to these requirements. And that's really important because what's behind is a single data format, in fact. So that's a really good example to explain, okay, the transmodel is covering quite a large area, and then each profile can be used to really address each requirement.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So as I said, I don't know who was first. Probably you can help me with that. Is Yves, Stefan, or Soren Sørensen that would like to raise some questions? It was you, Yves.
I don't know, but it's a short comment. It's due to the fact it's just related to the words which are used and ownership of these profiles. When we talk about the European Passenger Information Profile, the EPIP, currently it's the NetX one. But when we talk of the Siri EPIP, for the moment it's only a Siri one, and it has no name when we talk about real-time information. So the allocation, the terms to be used, the definitions, etc. In my opinion, is a very important thing to clarify.
There is a Siri minimum profile that we are going to release in Data4PT website soon. It's a work that we had initiated with the help of course, SEN and the relevant working groups. So there will be something like Siri EPIP profile very soon. That would be recommended. And about the question if those two different profiles are interoperable, actually they are. They just subset of the full NetX profile in order to support the implementation, and they refer to different data categories. So the EPIP is only what is related to passenger information, timetables, and operators related data, while in the European accessibility profile, the focus is on the accessibility facilities that the stations and the stops have. But more information will be shared through our communication channels very soon. We expect the first release in the beginning of February. Okay, I see Stefan then as second hand. Stefan, please.
Yes, only a short remark from point of view of ERA concerning those profiles, and I would like focus on the accessibility profile later on. A few remarks. We have, as already mentioned by Emanuele, we are just discussing in specific groups how NetX and the formats which are used in rail service are compliant or where they are different. And maybe an outcome could be to discuss how to proceed further to provide kind of a profile for rail. For accessibility, we have currently developed, or we are in discussions how to develop a profile for accessibility. We had already internal drafts available for some requirements from the European legislation for accessibility for rail. And we will now discuss and check them also with the ongoing discussions about the European accessibility profile, how far we are already aligned within rail with this profile, or where we might have some specific requirements for rail which should be covered in a specific profile. But you can see we are already discussing those profiles, at least for accessibility within rail. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for the clarifications. Then I give the floor to Søren Sørensen.
Yeah, hi, and thanks for the many presentations. I'm Søren Sørensen. I'm a consultant based in Copenhagen, and I'm looking on all the whole scene here as a potential future user of the mobility as a service data or the Mmtis data from the NAP. It seems like I haven't heard the private car mentioned in this meeting yet. The situation is that public transport is under attack by the use of private car as it is right now. So we are in a hurry. If I go in my car, I can use my GPS to go from Nordkap to Napoli. I can just put in the destination and it will show me when I'll be at that destination. And this is of course done simply by the sister regulations that has been made here in Europe. So we already can see the benefits on how those data, if they work together and if they have the same format, then sorry about that. But on this meeting, I think I've heard more words on why we should not really look too much to complying with the Mmtis regulation and deliver those data. And I just want to ask why. Because the private modes also are supposed to deliver, as I've understood, in 2 years' time. It's mandatory for everybody if you are if you're a law-obeying citizen. So who is helping the private modes and how can we make this a positive experience going forward and then not fighting about various standards, because the problem is that we have too many standards. That's the whole agenda of this. Thanks.
Okay, who would like to answer on this?
Maybe I can try to start, Anastasia. Just on the private modes in Mmtis, we include them. You also have bicycles and cars which are mentioned. Soren, you mentioned also the need to have a bridge and an articulation with the RTTI delegated regulation, which was just reviewed. This is our objective. I have highlighted it at the start to align the data categories. For example, we know there's work to be done on the parking standards to align the Transmodel, DATEX2 and EDPS standards for this. So this is taken into account, at least from our side, from the Commission side. And also there, I know that there's a lot of expectation that we put on NAPCOR, but it's a clear objective also of NAPCOR to bridge together the different delegated regulation. It's not only harmonization of the Mmtis NAPs, but it's harmonization of the NAPs between them. So there, hopefully, also work will happen. The subgroup on standards for multimodal standards is part of a whole working group on standards for the different delegated regulation. There's another subgroups on DATEX2, also for cars. So there will be, hopefully within NAPCOR, also work and alignment that will be done. And just also to react on the point that you have made on implementing and responding to your obligations. The obligations in RTTI and in Mmtis are not directly on the user, it's on the transport operator, the transport authorities and infrastructure managers. So just to clarify also this point, because you mentioned the passenger, but there's no obligation for the user directly. Even though in the future you might also have questions on in-vehicle data, but that's another debate as well, with other implications. Voilà, that was it.
I see also another hand from Ferdinand. Could you please also tell us from where are you, what you who you represent?
Hi, good morning. Ferdinand Burgersdijk, the leader of the Mass Alliance Working Groups for Technology Standardization and Ticketing. So very much involved in these discussions, and we just finished up and released a paper after a year's work on seeing how all these standards can be converging but are still very much supply oriented. And this is logical from a public transport point of view, but also in public transport we see a slow but direct change towards DRT, so demand responsive transport. And as Søren just mentioned, including all types of mobility and all sorts of mobility, which is a far broader scope than just going on here in PT. So I would really love to see, and thanks for all the great presentations. We are starting a new language, which is not just train, not just plane, not just bus oriented, all right, but mobility oriented, an ecosystem of which we are all a part. And we need to define that language anew, and not just from the old school business model of supply oriented, but also demand oriented. So thanks to Victoire for her last comment, which also included the fact that we have to look at the relationship between the individual and the actual services provided. So it's still a long way to go. And I just heard the mention of essential frameworks or essential standards. I think that's a good way to go. Go from the minimum, and with trust, we'll build it up. We don't have to discover it all at once, because we see that a lot of reference models go in a direction which is too rigid, because they're engineered from an ivory tower instead of the de facto ones which are already in play in the market. So I think we should find some kind of balance and organize that. So good luck on that.
Okay, thank you, Ferdinand. I don't see any other hand raised, so I would continue probably on asking what we have collected from other member states here. I have a question from Sweden. Again, for you, Victoire. And here the comment is that the penalties for those who do not deliver their data in accordance with Mmtis regulation is currently handled by each member state. But this has been seen as an obstacle to advancing the implementation because operators and especially commercial ones do not prioritize to deliver those data. Will be consider this aspect in the revision?
Yes, thank you. Very quickly on this one, it's what I was presenting also in the context of NAPCOR. There are two elements that will divert to help member states with implementation. And just to remind everyone that all member states are part of an NAPCOR project. So hopefully it will really help everyone. You have two working groups, one that will work on the strategic issues and governance issues. There we know that we need to jointly focus on pushing certain private actors who do not share data, sometimes non-European actors who do not share data, and member states and local authorities also need help with this. And so pooling together, being 27 member states with one voice, talking to these actors is most probably more efficient. So this will be one of the tasks in NAPCOR. And then I have also mentioned that we will look at harmonizing the compliance requirement forms. So there will be also a specific working group looking at these issues. Without harmonizing it in the law, we are rather using NAPCOR as a tool to help member states properly implement and to join together to speak with one voice to actors who are a bit more reluctant.
Thank you very much, Victoire. Okay, any other question? I don't see for now from the audience. Still a lot of questions for the member states has been collected. We have talked about profiles. I hope that it's more clear now. I don't know if Emmanuel, you would like to comment on the profiles question that was raised in the chat. Emmanuel? Okay, I hope that it was answered.
Yes, if there is anything to add, I don't know. But...
Okay, I have also some questions that are more addressed to everybody, to all member states and representatives of member states that are in the call. And I think this is also something very related to NAPCOR and gives a good opportunity to talk about NAPCOR. And the question is coming from Czech Republic, asking which is the organizational model for operating the NAP. And that is meant for the public sector vs the private sector. So Czech Republic asks what are the recommendations on how to govern the NAP, and if the advantages have been identified by the Mmtis legislation, or is a recommendation at the EU level. Who would like to comment on that? Could be also another member state, but could be also Victoire or Emmanuel. This is a subject of NAPCOR, so NAPCOR will deal with that. But I don't know if you want to add any comment on this.
No,
And I
I see Susanna has raised her hand.
Susanna, you can probably make it rephrase it better or express your question.
Hello. Basically, a lot of information has been answered during the workshop, and I assume that all information will be addressed in the upcoming NAPCO project concerning to organization model. But I just would like to ask you if the requirements will be maybe in the upcoming analysis, which has been mentioned in the first presentation concerning to organization model.
So maybe it's more for me, but Susanna, can you explain just in terms of the analysis, what are the elements that you are looking for?
I just have general question about the organization of national access point. Is it advantages to be run by the public or private sector?
Yeah, so just from my side, so we have left it very open in the context of Mmtis. We don't have any legal obligation, and it's true that at the moment we don't have an analysis of how it functioned better from one member state to another based on the who ran the national access points. Now that's of course a discussion that also can take place in NAPCOR, in the working group on interoperability, also potentially of the NAPs. I guess there's different also challenges depending on who's leading the NAP. From our side, the key challenge that we see emerging are related also to having the data, and this is a challenge in any case, whether it's a private or public actor that runs the national access point, having back the data from operators, and also this question of standards that we have thoroughly been discussing today, and harmonization of the standards. So I'm sorry that it's a bit difficult for us to be more precise on your response, and hopefully again with NAPCOR this can be addressed jointly by member states.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer.
Okay, and just to sum up the comments and the questions, I see a comment regarding the silos and how we work currently on the standardization of work. I don't know if someone from the panelists would like to reply to this comment, and what is the how this challenge of working in silos will be addressed at the end in European standardization level. Yves, you would like to react?
Yes, in fact, working in silo is something which is a common thing in every institution, I would say. It's always complex to coordinate with others, but certainly all what has been developed by SEN and SENELEC has been developed with a wide distribution of information and with many people representing local PTAs and PTOs. However, even in SEN-SENELEC, the tools which are used are very complex, and they need some skills. And I think that it would be important to make operators and PTAs able to participate a bit more in these technical discussions, which means that they should contract people with these specific skills. And it's first the big ones have already these skills, but the others, they should try to do more than they do up to now. It's a technical issue. Of course, it's a political issue as well, but there are tools which are new, which are complex, and when you look at the details of the standards, it's obvious that you need to read a lot of things before you understand. And then if you want to modify something, you will need to, if you go in the details, to be able to discuss with the experts in these fields. So to conclude, this message is invest more in these skills, and for local, the small operators who cannot do that, in fact it's too costly, then try to join some associations, IT4PT or STA or CNA, the Calypso Network Association, for those who use the Calypso things. Try to participate, coordinate, so that you can listen and contribute in different ways. So put efforts in these fields.
Thank you very much, Yves. And I would like also to add here that Data4PT has also this role. Since we interact directly with PTOs and we also interact with IT suppliers, and we really we planned also this stakeholders forum to give the floor also to them and to have direct access to what is discussed in EU level and standardization work level. So we hope that this forum also contributed to what you mentioned. And I will ask now Emmanuel and probably also others to help me conclude this meeting and to draw some takeaways before we close. We have 2 minutes though. Any final comment from your side?
Yes, on my side, I can, just first thanks all the speakers and all attendees today, as we had quite great and useful debate. So we really expect from such a stakeholder forum to open this discussion, to make everyone aware about what Data4PT is doing, but also all the links with other initiatives. Because as you understood, one of our main objectives, and I'm sure Anders will also conclude around it, is in IT4PT, we really expect to make the glue between all these different initiatives to make sure that we can secure harmonization and alignment of the different bodies and involved parties, which is quite challenging, of course, quite ambitious, that's for sure, but that's a key requirement for all the stakeholders. And what's, I think, is quite good from today is that we see that there are a lot of initiatives thanks to European Commission, thanks to all this regulation, which already give a framework regarding how this mobility data have to be made available. There are also, of course, a lot of initiatives through the standardization bodies, the Sensenelec, and that's really important in terms of governance to secure that standards are made available according to a strong and fair governance process. That's really important, even if, there are sometimes still discussion about how it's done in terms of accessibility of the document and so on, but at least it's running such a formal standardization process, and that's really important in terms of governance. And there are also a lot of key contributors and involved bodies, as we discussed today, between the public transport domain, between the rail domain, and our, I would say, our shared objective altogether is to make this mobility data available and to make the mobility travels more accessible, attractive, and that's our shared objective. So then, of course, there are debates about more the technical part, the data format, how to implement, how to convert, how to map, and that's let's say more the backstage from what we are doing in Data4PT, and that's of course a strong requirements to make this happening. But that's really what Data4PT expect to deliver: this technical support, technical skills, technical teams with support of experts. And of course, you are all very welcome to join, to feed this discussion, to report any technical question you could have. And we are here in Data4PT to answer this question, to support you in the implementation. And that's really our objective, to make this happening and to have a smooth implementation of all these standards. But
okay,
please,
thank
Anders.
you very much. And Anders, yeah, only 1 minute for you because we are already overpassed. We have already overpassed our time.
I think it looks more like -2 minutes. I just like to thank you, Emmanuel, for the good for the summary of the status, and I would like also just to comment shortly on. I followed the chat here during the meeting and also discussion in the meeting, and of course, the closer we come to an implementation, it becomes clearer that there are different interests and different solutions and also conflicting interests that we need to manage. But I welcome that, and I think every process needs to be able to manage everything as things are. So let us just proceed in the way we have started and driven the project so far. And I'm sure we will come to good solutions eventually and also shortly. So thank you to all the stakeholders, and thank you from the IT4PT side and on behalf of the Data4PT project. And also especially thank you to you, Anastasia, for managing the meeting and managing a lot of things in the project so well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, this was done with our coordinator, UITP, Daria, Sala, Charlotte. So it's a bigger team that supports this event. Thank you very much for your participation. And we understand that the schedule was really tight, and this is why the thank you is really coming from our hearts, because you were also very active and very interested in the topic, and it was shown also through the debate on the discussion on the chat. See you very soon in our next event. So you will be informed about those events through our communication channels. So have a nice day, have a nice week, and also very nice holidays. Goodbye from me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.